All right. Good morning, if it's morning where you are when you're watching this. Um, this is a change, massive change in the whole direction of the NHL. In that, all of a sudden, expansion teams are winning things. Boston's still the number one team overall. They come in at 52, 17, and 19. Montreal's second in the East at 45, 24, and 9. The Rangers 40, 24, and 14. Toronto 35, 27, and 16. Buffalo 32, 34, and 12. Detroit 29, 39, and 10. And that descent has really started to take over in Detroit. For Vancouver at 24, 43, and 11, they're not getting much better. And the Islanders 19, 41, and 18 represents a small improvement, but there's going to be some massive improvement coming. And Denny Potvin puts up a pretty good season, and Clark Gillies is their number one draft pick that following spring. So the pieces are being set in place. We're just not seeing the come to fruition yet. In Philly, things are changing big time. The Broad Street Bullies are in full effect, 50, 16, and 12. And penalties, a lot of them. There are 7 guys who have over 100 penalty minutes, and 2 who have over 200. And it is a definite shift in the sport. Chicago's second in the division at 41, 14, and 23. LA third at 33, 33, and 12. Followed by Atlanta at 30, 34, and 14. Of course, this is not going to be Calgary for another 6 seasons. Pittsburgh 28, 41, and 9. St. Louis 26, 40, and 12. Minnesota 22, 38, and 17. And there's the California Seals with 13 wins, 55 losses, and 10 ties. California and Philly come into the league at the same time, and there's 37 wins in between the two. It is a complete and total mismanagement that we're witnessing with the California Seals, and it really doesn't get better. So there you go. Gordie Howe comes out of retirement at age 45 to play in the WHA with his sons Mark and Marty. Marty Howe is the answer to trivia questions of who was the other son of Gordie Howe. Marty Howe had a half-decent career in the WHA, didn't play very long in the NHL, which is why he's kind of forgotten in the mix. March 12th of 1973, the Leafs signed 2 guys out of Europe, the big name being Borje Salming, and that will change everything when Borje Salming comes over. May 15th, 1973, Bernie Parent is traded by the Leafs for a first-round draft pick in 1973 and future considerations. Bernie Parent, who had played pretty darn well for Toronto the year before. Bernie Parent, whose dream it had always been to play for the Leafs and got to play with Jacques Plante, and the Leafs traded him to Philly for some reason. And Doug Favell ended up being their starter that year, who they got back from Philly. It's weird. March 30th, 1974, Bernie Parent gets his record 45th win out of 47. Now, of course, that record has been eclipsed by Marty Brodeur, who got 48. But Marty Brodeur's record includes shootout wins and overtime wins. Bernie Parent didn't have that. So there's a little asterisk there, which says that Bernie Parent's record is still pretty darn impressive and is still on some level the official record of regulation wins in a season. April 6th of 1974, Denny Potvin ends up with the rookie record on defense. 17 goals, 54 assists, and 71 points. So Denny Potvin has put the league on notice. And while the Islanders are still pretty bad, they've got Resch, they've got Potvin, and they're getting there. They're a bossy short, basically, of becoming what they're going to be, because they did, as I said, draft Clark Gillies. February 20th of 1974, Phil Esposito gets his 4th straight 50-goal season. And March 12th of 74, Bobby Orr gets his 5th straight year at 100 points, which is a record. Both of those are records. Phil Esposito's 4 50-goal seasons, pretty darn impressive. First-team All-Stars, Esposito of the Bruins, Hodge of the Bruins, Rick Martin, so who I did the video on yesterday, went into my Hall of Fame, gets first-line left wing. Bobby Orr, Brad Park on defense, and Bernie Parent in net. Second team, Bobby Clarke of the Flyers, Mickey Redmond of the Red Wings, Wayne Cashman of the Bruins, White of the Blackhawks, and Barry Ashby of the Philadelphia Flyers. So they got 2 second-team All-Stars, and then Tony Esposito of the Hawks. Now, getting into awards. Esposito of Boston's your Hart winner. Esposito of Boston's your Art Ross winner. And the Norris goes to Bobby Orr, which is a huge surprise to everybody. Just pretend you're surprised. The Calder goes to Potvin of New York Islanders. The Vezina goes to Bernie Parent, which he shares with Tony Esposito of the Blackhawks. So since both teams tied for the lowest amount of goals against and there's no overtime, they share the Vezina trophy. The Adams Award goes to Fred Shero of the Philadelphia Flyers. So this is the first year of the Jack Adams, and Shero's the first winner. And he's the guy leading the Flyers to something grand. So it's pretty fitting that he ends up winning the Adams. The Lady Byng goes to John Busick of the Boston Bruins. The Masterton goes to Henri Richard of the Montreal Canadiens. The Pearson Award goes to Esposito of the Bruins. The Conn Smythe goes to Bernie Parent of these guys. The Patrick Award for growing the sport in the U.S. goes to Alex Delvecchio, Murray Murdoch, Weston W. Adams Sr., and Charles L. Cravatt. The number one draft pick that year, Washington and Kansas City are coming in. Boy, you thought the league was watered down before. You wait till Washington and Kansas City are on this board tomorrow. Greg Jolly is the number one draft pick, the first draft pick in Washington Capitals history. He goes on to play 365 games, gets 21 goals, 76 assists, 97 points. Jolly's an interesting one in that his first year is cut short by injuries. So on a team that really needs his help, and this is his first, what should have been his first full season in the NHL. It's cut short by injuries, and his career never recovered. He ends up going to Detroit, plays a bit for Detroit, ends up finishing his career as an Adirondack Red Wing for his last 2 years, and then retires. Jolly is, I would think, the first public flop in draft history. The guy that gets talked about as a flop, and there were other, as I've pointed out, other number one draft picks before this that didn't play a single game in the NHL. But Jolly, probably because of the fact that we're seeing further expansion, and you got Potvin as a number one draft pick who's a big star, for Jolly to come in a year after, it's probably bad timing. And of course, Guy Lafleur is number one draft pick. There's a number of really good number one draft picks. Now, in the playoffs, while we're not going to talk about Washington again for a couple of minutes, in the playoffs, in the quarterfinals, Boston beats Toronto in 4 straight. The New York Rangers beat Montreal in 6. So Montreal's out, Toronto's out. So no Stanley Cup for Canada. Philadelphia's over Atlanta. The Atlanta Flames get swept. So Atlanta looks like the better team between themselves and the Islanders, but the playoffs are going to be that proving ground. Chicago over LA in 5. The semifinals, Boston survives Chicago in 6. So again, after the first round, you cross over and you play the other division. The Philadelphia Flyers beat the Rangers. And this is significant because it's the first time that an expansion team has beaten an original 6 team in the playoffs. So it is a major victory for the Philadelphia Flyers in that it gives legitimacy to the teams that were brought into the league in 1967, which they desperately needed. Yes, St. Louis got to the first 3 Stanley Cup finals, but they did so by beating other expansion teams. Philly beats an original 6. In those Stanley Cup finals, you got Boston and you got Philly. Philly goes into Boston with home ice. Boston wins at home 3-2, and then Philly wins in Boston in overtime 3-2. Games 3 and 4 are both won in Philly by the Flyers, 4-1 and 4-2. Boston wins Game 5 to prolong the series with a 5-1 win. Bernie Parent says, yeah, no, I don't think so in Game 6. And they beat the Bruins 1-0 to win the Stanley Cup in 6. It was the opening game of this season that Kate Smith first sang God Bless America to the Philadelphia faithful. And that is something, of course, that they still have, and they still use that footage of her singing God Bless America, and it seems like it's an emotional lift to the fans. It's very symbolic of this era and of what the Flyers were. Goals leaders in the playoffs, McLeish with 13. Assist leader is Bobby Orr with 14. The points leader, Rick McLeish with 22. So pretty solid playoffs for Rick McLeish. Wins leader, Bernie Parent with 12. Gilles Gilbert of the Boston Bruins with 10. And I wanted to mention a couple of numbers here. Dave Schultz, the Hammer, had 348 penalty minutes in the regular season and 139 in 17 playoff games. Now, playoffs are no longer a time for fighting. Philadelphia thought it was a perfectly fine time for fighting, especially Schultz. Bernie Parent put up stunning numbers, 1.89 goals against average and 12 shutouts. He also had a .933 save percentage in the regular season. and he had a 2.02 goals against average and 2 shutouts in the playoffs. So in a time where we're starting to see goals take over, Bernie Parent is a throwback. Now the expansion draft is kind of sad, and I'm being honest about that. Kansas City, the biggest names I could find: Michel Plasse, who was a #1 draft pick of the Montreal Canadiens. They get him. Gary Croteau of the California Golden Seals, and Dave Hudson of the New York Islanders. Those are the biggest names I could come up with for Kansas City. And for Washington, Ron Lowe is drafted there from Toronto. The seasons that Ron Lowe is about to endure in Washington will make him wonder why, which deity really hates him the most. Yvonne Laber of Labrie from Pittsburgh. Again, I'm really pulling at this point, and Gord Smith from LA. And this is why Washington and Kansas City are going to put up horrendous first years in the NHL. And when you look at the early history of the Washington Capitals, looking at California, they're in the dumps. Kansas City's never going to get out of it, not in Kansas City anyways. It's amazing that Washington survived this era. It is amazing that the Capitals survived this era, because this era was brutal. And the fact that the fans came out at all is startling, and it makes it all the better that you'll know that at some point during this series, Washington finally overcomes the odds. But for now, it is Philly that overcame the odds and became your Stanley Cup champions for 1974. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comment section below what you think, and any thoughts you may have. I know we're into a part of this series where there are some subscribers that remember this era and remember it quite fondly. So again, let me know your thoughts. And thank you guys so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon.